Okay, thanks for the introduction, and thank you to everyone for organising this conference. Welcome everyone to my session on error handling and how you need to be looking outside the immediate object you're coding when you're thinking about all of this stuff. So, a little bit about me to start with. My name is Chris. Those are my contact details up on the screen if you want to contact me after the talk. I've been a SQL developer for about 15 years, and most companies I've worked at have had some kind of standard template for their stored procedures to handle errors. And they're all sort of variations on the same thing, and they all have the same issue with them. So today, we're going to go through what that standard error template is, what's wrong with it, and how we can fix it. So this is one version of that standard template. It's using try-catch blocks and transaction commands. And the basic idea here is whenever something goes wrong within the stored proc, you want to roll everything back and throw the error. So the proc either succeeds or fails as one thing. This particular procedure is creating a welcome mailer. It's doing that by firstly creating a mailing, then creating a voucher attached to the mailing. And in this case, we know that customers really don't like to get the mailing without the voucher. So if we don't create the voucher, we also don't want to create the mailing. So next up, we're going to step through this and see how this error handling actually works. But to make it a little easier to follow along with, I'm just going to collapse some of that code so it's all just a bit simpler there on the screen. So when we start off executing this, we begin with a transaction count of 0. When we begin the transaction, that'll tick up to 1. We'll try to create the mailing. That works. We try to create the voucher, and that fails. At that point, we're going to jump down to this catch block, and this rollback will kick in. And that's going to effectively undo creation of the mailing, and it's going to take that transaction count down to 0. And finally, we're going to throw that error to whatever it is that called this stored proc, so the caller can decide what to do now it's failed. And that all sounds great, right? So what's the problem? Well, the problem comes when you zoom out a little bit, you look at the system as a whole, and you see all these other stored procedures here, some of which are calling that procedure we just looked at. So let's look at one of those. This procedure here is creating a new customer, and it's doing that by creating a customer, then an account, and then executing that proc we just looked at. So let's step through this and see what happens here. So we'll collapse everything first, and we'll begin the step through with a transaction count of 0. That ticks up to 1. We successfully create the customer, successfully create the account, and then we step into the proc we were just looking at. Transaction count is still 1 at the start. That'll tick up to 2. Successfully create the mailing, but then we fail to create the voucher. There's some error thrown here again. So like before, we're going to jump to that rollback in the catch block, and we're going to roll back the create mailing, and our transaction count is going to tick down. But it only ticks down to 1 because it was 2 when we started this rollback. So the rollback is actually going to keep going, and it's going to undo our account creation and our customer creation, and only here is it going to actually hit 0. You might be starting to see the problem here, but we're actually this code isn't quite done yet, because this catch block here is still going. We finished the rollback, but now we're going to hit the throw, and that's going to raise an error in this outer procedure, and that means the outer procedure is going to jump down to this catch block here, and it's going to try and roll back. But the transaction count is 0, so that rollback's going to fail, and it's going to throw an error of its own. The code will carry on to this throw, so it will throw the correct error, but the first error that our caller is going to see is this, which is kind of useless. And a lot of callers are a lot of the calling code, unless you've set it up quite cleverly, is probably just going to handle the first error it sees. It's maybe just going to log the first error it sees, which means we've hidden the actual problem from ourselves now. Whatever error handling we have in that calling proc can't really work. And we've also got a problem because of these rollbacks here. We've rolled back bits of this outer proc because of something that happened in this inner proc. And that is going to cause us some issues if we ever try and do something clever in that outer proc and handle errors a little more gracefully, like we have done here. So here we've decided this create welcome mailer fails all the time. And when it fails, we still want to have a customer and an account. And we're just going to put this has welcome voucher flag on the customer table, and we're going to set it to false when we first create it. And then when we try and do this welcome mailer, we're going to put it through a while loop. And if it succeeds, it'll break out of the loop and we'll set welcome voucher to true. And if it fails, we'll increment the try counter by 1. So it should go through this loop a maximum of 3 times. And if it fails, it fails. We've still got the customer, we've still got the account, and we can see where a customer doesn't have a welcome voucher and do something manual to fix that later on. A bit of a hack, but it's the best solution we've come up with in a short space of time. But it's not going to work. Because what will actually happen is your customer will be created, your account will be created, and then if your welcome mailer fails, that rollback within the welcome mailer is going to spill out, like we just saw, and undo the account and customer creation. And then we're going to try to create welcome mailer again, but it'll obviously fail because we don't have a customer to create it against anymore. And we'll try it a third time and it'll fail a third time. But because there's nothing in this catch block to throw an error or anything, we're just going to skip ahead to this commit, which will also fail because there's no transaction to commit. But again, we're going to hide all of our actual problems from ourselves, and crucially, we're not going to create our customer or our account like we want to. So this feels like we're almost doing everything right, but the little bit we're doing wrong is causing everything to break. So what can we actually do to fix this? The answer is you use a save point. You begin the transaction like you would have done before, but immediately after that you create a save point, and then if there's a problem in the catch block, you roll back to that save point, and then you do need to commit after that because you have begun the transaction, so there is still an open transaction there. But all you're committing is this kind of nothing between the begin and the save. Obviously, if it works, then you just commit and it commits everything, and that's fine. This transaction ID just needs to be generated in some way that you know is going to be unique. I like to use sequence objects and convert them to varchar, but however you want to do it is up to you. And that is really it. It's quite a simple solution to quite a complex problem, but there is a bit of a complication. If you roll back to a save point, it doesn't affect your transaction count. So if you have a design pattern where you begin a transaction, then create a save point, begin a second transaction, and roll back to that save point, it doesn't roll back that second begin. Your transaction count is still going to be 0, it's still going to be 2 at the end of it because you've got your 2 begins. But you just have to be a bit clever there. If that's a design pattern you're using, you need to be aware of it and do something else in your error handling to handle that scenario. And some of you might be thinking, why not just name the transaction? That seems a simpler thing than messing around with these save points. The answer is name transactions are a lie. You can only ever name the outer transaction if you're nesting transactions, and your rollback will fail if you try and roll back to a point that doesn't exist. So you're just going to create problems for yourself if you try that route. So that's it. If there are any questions, please do get in touch with me. Thank you to Ben and William for organising the event, and to all of you for listening, and have a great weekend, everyone.